Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States.
Whenever you want to have a debate with a fake liberal, they always resort to violence.
We need to wake people up. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Shari Dovale, who's been following the Bundy trial very closely. There may be some good news for the Bundy family. Certainly there's some good news for Shari Dovale. Congratulations, Shari. I understand you're about to be a grandmother.
Yeah.
Your daughter is on the way to the hospital. I really appreciate you taking the time, and this very important family time, to come and talk to us about this. But I know this is an issue that is very dear to your heart. But congratulations on your impending becoming a grandmother.
Thank you very much. We are very excited.
That's great. Is this the first grandchild?
No, it's number 6, but it's this daughter's first.
Wow. Wow, that's great. That's great. Well, congratulations. It's coming at a great time of year. Let's talk about what may be a big gift for the Bundy family and a gift to all of us, too, because let's understand, the rule of law and seeing justice done in this country is something that affects all of us. Whether or not you agree with the Bundys, they should have a fair trial. And what we have seen here has been a real miscarriage of justice. And now even this federal judge, Gloria Navarro, who has been firmly on the side of the government instead of being an impartial advocate here, even she has about had it now, hasn't she, Shari? Tell us what has just happened. You got a headline article up on Redoubt News, and that's where you can find Shari Dovale's articles, redoubtnews.com. Is the Bunkerville trial of the century finished? Why would that be finished? What happened that makes you think that that is finished?
Well, yesterday they only had about an hour and a half of public hearing, and then the jury was sent home. The jury actually is not expected back before the 20th of December, and the judge made comments that they may not be needed then.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. You have in your article, they won't be back before December 20th if they are needed.
Yeah,
if you say if the jury is needed, that kind of sounds like, you know, I may be shutting this thing down. That's the comment that everybody has picked up on.
Yes, and it's absolutely true. She went into more of her secret hearings. She's really gone overboard on these secret hearings and sealed evidence and such like that. But when they came out, the general gist of it is there's at least 14 different items that the judge is not aware that the prosecution has turned over to the defense.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So they're hiding evidence from the defense. And, of course, this judge, Navarro, has been complicit, actually has indicated in the past trials that we've seen. You cannot talk about the BLM is off limits. You can't talk about the guy who is running this operation, Dan Love. If somebody says they were afraid, you have to leave that there as if they were afraid of the protesters, not afraid of the BLM. And when the lawyer said, well, who are you afraid of? That's off limit. You can't talk about that. So, I mean, that's the way this judge has previously run this trial. So for her to say this is over the top, that truly is amazing, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I've got it on pretty good authority that they are right now just trying to figure out a graceful way for the prosecution to bow out of this case.
But, of course, if they bow out with this one, if they declare a mistrial here, they would most likely come after them one more time, at least, don't you think?
Well, that's where the questions come in. If the trials previously are definitely affected by the government not turning over all of the evidence. So I think there's a pretty good chance that the previous defendants that were found guilty, such as Todd Engel and Greg Burleson, and possibly the defendants that were forced into plea agreements, have very good grounds for appeal. But as far as the defendants going forward, that would be the question, whether or not they will try them, or, you know, now that they've got all the evidence, you know, what is the prosecution's intention?
Yeah, because we've had previous trials, as you mentioned, a couple of individuals who were found guilty, other individuals who were found innocent of most of the charges, and you know it was a hung jury because the jury could see the bias. They could see how they were being lied to, and so they pushed back on that. But again, if that happens in one trial, they say, okay, well, we learned some lessons from that, and we're going to give it another trial. We'll just look at that as practice for how we have to handle this thing. We're going to keep coming until we get the results that we want. It seems to be the way the government is operating in this situation.
Yes, absolutely that's what they've done. And every trial has had the same theme, though it's had a little bit, a few differences. The judge has backed up the prosecution every time, but this one's kind of flown into her face, and she cannot hide from it.
It's kind of interesting. I haven't been at the trial. You've been at the trial watching it. Do you think that the continuing pattern of lies is wearing down the judge's prejudice? Is she starting to have a change of heart like we saw with the juries, realizing that, hey, this thing is so rigged, I'm not going to buy into this and go down with these people, go down with a ship? Or is she having, you think, some kind of, I know it's a subjective question, you think she's having some kind of a ethical crisis here?
Well, it is totally my opinion on this, but yeah, I think it's coming back to haunt her. She's realized that she's, jumped on the wrong ship and it's going down, and she needs to pretty much save herself.
Yes. It gets to the point where the corruption is just so obvious, so reeking, that even somebody who initially wanted to weigh in on this and do everything she could, put her thumb on the scale of justice for the other people, says, you know what, this is just a little bit too obvious. I've been caught with this. Talk about the multiple Brady violations. Define that for the audience.
Well, Brady violations are basically, I'm sorry, my mind is a little bit wandered.
I understand. You're there waiting for your grandbaby to come, but go ahead.
That's it. Brady violations are when the prosecution does not reveal exculpatory evidence to the defense. That means evidence that could help the defense and possibly exonerate them. If you don't turn over this evidence, then it's actually a violation that they could be held liable for, though it's not normally done.
And you're saying that there's at least 7 cases of that have come to light in this most recent trial?
Absolutely. There's at least 7 of those. There's also a multitude of what they call giglio violations, which is not timely turning over evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they have
turning it over, but being late and turning it over so that it impairs the defense.
Well, an example of that would be in November, one of the agents there, one of the FBI agents, Agent Gavin, did a report, and I believe it was on possibly the 20th of November. She wrote a report, and they immediately turned it over to the defense, but the report contained information that should have been turned over a couple of years ago.
Yes. So
they're saying they didn't violate anything because they turned the report over right away, but the judge said, wait a minute, this is not something that should have been done, today. It should have been done quite some time ago. So she's kind of onto them, and she is.
And the other thing that happened within, what is it, like the last month or two, that caused the Bundy family to finally get bail after a couple of years was she realized that they were lying and covering up information showing that they had snipers, that they had surveillance cameras and so forth. And they were hiding all that so they could pretend that the Bundys and the people who were there to support them were the aggressors, when in actual fact it was the other way around. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Shari Dovale, Redoubt News. Is the Bunkerville trial over? Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Shari Dovale of Redoubt News. She has been following very closely the trial of the Bundy family members there after the Bunkerville standoff. These are people who have been locked away in jail. They have suffered, at the very least, you could say harassment. They would say they were tortured, brutally treated, and prison held there for nearly 2 years. It was based on lies from the BLM and the federal government and prosecutors saying that they were the aggressors. If you look at the complaint, they charged Cliven, for example, brandishing a firearm. He never had a firearm the entire time I was there. Certainly wasn't doing it at the standoff. We were there for several days before the standoff. He wasn't even at the standoff, and he wasn't carrying a weapon, and neither was Ammon Bundy carrying a weapon. But they are charged with brandishing firearms. Absolutely false. And they put pressure on them, keeping them in jail, stacking up all these because they're trying to pressure them into taking a plea bargain. And that's what most of us in the U.S. do. We don't stand firmly for our rights. And, Shari, when I look at what's going on with the Bundy family, my heart goes out to them for their suffering, because I agree with them on the constitutional issues. But they have stood steadfast and courageous, and no matter how much pressure is applied to them, They will put their life on the line, and they will not move off of these principles. And that's the thing coming out of this. All these people who are criticizing the Bundys and don't understand the issues here, they need to understand how they have been abused in this legal process, because if we don't fix this legal system, it's going to affect all of us, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This family is an inspiration.
Yes.
I don't know how they've done it. It's not widely known, but Ammon was offered a plea agreement that would have allowed him to go home several months ago.
Yes.
And it would have been a time-served deal. He would not have had to deal with any more court. It's just basically the same deal that they offered Pete Santilli, which he accepted. But Ammon said, not a chance. It's not going to happen. I'm in the right, and I'm going to see this through. And
the popular slander against the Bundys is that they just didn't want to pay their fees, and they finally got caught.
Well,
and nothing could be further from the truth. They were standing on principles when they wouldn't pay their fees, and if that was the kind of people they would have caved in a long time ago with a plea bargain.
Oh, absolutely. And like I say, there was not even a bill for grazing fees sent to the Bundys.
Yeah,
the bill
that's right.
that they ended up getting was trespassing fees, and that was for less than $9,000 of the actual fines, not including, all the additional administrative costs that they tack on, which only ended up being less than $300,000. It's nowhere near the million plus that the mainstream media, spouts.
That's right. And yet you see the mainstream media pull this up and say, these are millionaire ranchers. We know that's not the truth.
Not at
we
all.
know that they're working very, very hard for a meager existence that most people in cities and suburbs would not accept that kind of hard work. They would not do the kind of work that pays that little. They did it because they wanted to be on the land, because they wanted to be farmers. It's just such a gross misrepresentation when we look at the way that it's been spun by the media. But let's talk a little bit about some of the other issues here, and that is one of the ones that you bring up in your article is the Bunkerville trial of the century finished. You talk about the long string of secret orders and sealed hearings and things that we're not even going to be allowed to see, presumably even if they declare a mistrial, right? It'll still be sealed, right?
Well, the Constitution guarantees a public trial, and this
That's right.
has not really been that. There's been some days that we can go in there for a few hours, but they will turn around and shut down the trial for a sealed hearing. And most of the evidence is sealed. And I firmly believe they need to unseal everything. It's not just the grand jury testimony that's getting sealed. For example, there is a threat assessment out there that the world needs to read. They've referred to it many times in the court, but they aren't letting everybody read it. This threat assessment was done way back in, I'm guessing maybe 2012, that said the Bundy family is not a threat. And that's the information they've used to keep them in jail, lying to the court saying, oh, of course they're a threat. They're a threat to the public. They're dangerous. Well, they're not.
They're a threat to the government's lives is what they're a threat to. And it is a serious national security issue for them, because it threatens the way they do business, the way they control us. If they are exposed, it's a big threat to them. My wife and I went to England a few years ago, probably 20 plus years ago. And we were, as part of our vacation, we're kind of nerds, so we decided that we would go to the Old Bailey Criminal Court and set in on a trial, and we did. And so we're sitting there. It's very interesting trying to piece together what was happening in this trial, because we kind of jumped in the middle of it. And then something came up about the CIA, and the judge says, clear the court, national security, we've got to get everybody out here. And you can kind of understand that. But this doesn't have any national security here. It has the security that the government is able to operate by hiding what they do and showing the tactics of what the government is doing. That's what they don't want to expose. There's nothing here that threatens our national security. It threatens their power over us if we know how they operate.
Absolutely. The majority of the evidence that's sealed just goes to show the government's bad acts.
That's absolutely amazing. Now, once they seal this, I'm not sure what will happen with this. As I said before, if they declare a mistrial with this, will the stuff that is currently sealed, will that remain sealed? Is it sealed only to the jury, only for this trial, or does it remain sealed after the trial?
That is something I can't answer. Not being an attorney, I don't know the procedures. I do know that there are some people who are actively working to get this unsealed. I don't know if they'll be successful.
Well, that's interesting because people need to understand what is going on with this. I mean, we're still trying to unpack the injustice that was done to Ross Ulbricht with the Silk Road issue, and very similar in many ways to this. They had people in that particular case who had taken over the keys to that website and had stolen nearly $1 million. They were federal agents. The jury was not allowed to know that. That was exculpatory evidence that would have cleared him. They kept that away, and appeal courts kept that away. So when the government comes in and they want to get somebody and set them up for multiple life sentences for running a website because he was letting people buy and sell things that were prohibited by the government and using Bitcoin to do it anonymously, they made an example out of him, and they pulled all the strings to make this go through. The same thing is happening here with the Bundys, because the issue of land use and of property rights, you know, if they can take the property rights of ranchers who have grazing and water rights, or miners who have mineral rights, those are property rights, or loggers, those are property rights. And you can have all of those property rights on the same piece of land that none of them actually own the land. It could belong to the state or it could belong to the federal government, but they all have property rights. And those property rights are in essence the same as the deed to your home. If they can take away their property, they can take away your property as well. And they frequently do with eminent domain and other things. But the way they're doing it here is even more underhanded, isn't it, Shari?
Absolutely it is. And they do have vested property rights out there with water rights, etc. The government doesn't want everybody to know that. They don't want everybody to know that part of the protest, for example, when Margaret Houston was thrown to the ground, she was trying to stop the truck that had all the water infrastructure in it.
Yeah, they were out there destroying stuff. They were killing cattle. They were killing prize bulls and so forth. And their property rights, their grazing and water rights went back to before the BLM ever existed, before Utah was even a state. That is the key thing. And we've seen the same thing happen with miners out in Oregon who had rights to mines that were out there before it was a state and before there was a BLM or a wildlife management or whatever that was coming at them at the time. So all of these property rights are being taken away by bureaucracies who are not held accountable, and we're not allowed to see what they're doing because they seal this stuff in court.
Absolutely. The government has kind of run amok here. They want everybody off land. Loggers, farmers, miners, we're all going to have to go if they get...
And homeowners in your suburbs, you're the next ones if you don't stand up for these principles. Thank you so much for joining us, Shari, especially as your daughter is about to have her first baby. Merry Christmas to you, and congratulations, and thank you for taking time away to talk to us about this.
Thank you, David. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Thank you. Shari Dovale, Redoubt News.
What the aging process is when the cell replicates, we lose a little bit of our telomeres. Telomeres are the little cups on the end of our chromosomes.
And when it runs out, you start dying. Secure your DNA force today at InfoWarsLife.com.